So as I mentioned, there are two parts of this presentation. One is the social and environmental impacts, and the other is the cost and benefit estimation. Okay, but before I go in, Carlos, can you help mute some participants because there is some disturbance? I think you can go to them and you can mute them because you are the.
I did so, but then you just opened again.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
I'm trying to help them.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can proceed.
Okay, but before I go into my presentation, I would just like to put one review question. Please note this question down, and we will, I mean, you can, maybe in the break or in the free time, you can do this rough calculation. It's a very simple question, and using the basic formula for hydropower calculation. I think you know that already. In case you have some questions, I can answer them. Basically, we are talking of a very micro level hydropower project study or planning. We are saying a community has, let's say, 60 kilowatt of power output to meet their daily electricity needs. It's a very small community, and they need just 60 kilowatt power, peak power. And now we have a site which has 100 meter of gross head, which is available. We see one small river where we can divert this river through a pipe or a canal and get this 100 meter of gross head. Now, what would be the design discharge required to meet the community's electricity needs? So we want to know how much discharge volume per second that we need, design discharge. It's basically meter cube per second, but for the small size, it can be liter per second also. But we use the formula with SI unit, so meter cube per second of discharge. And we will assume the overall efficiency is 55%. This includes the hydraulic losses, the hydraulic efficiency of transferring water from the river to the powerhouse, the turbine efficiency, the losses in the turbine, and the generator losses. So we assume 55% overall efficiency, and we want to know what is the design discharge. I just want you to, so you have 60 kilowatt, 100 meter gross head, 55% of overall efficiency. This is just a review question. Think about it. We will come back maybe after some time, after I go to some parts of my presentation today. Okay, as I mentioned, I have two parts. The first part is on environmental social issues. So I will talk about the environmental social impacts, public acceptance, sharing, it should be benefits. I'm sorry, there's a small spelling mistake. Community mobilization. Also, gender issue is a very important issue in hydropower development, especially at the community level, because men and women have different roles and they are affected in a different way. And now modern hydropower systems should be able to differentiate these gender differences. Then I will talk about some sustainability, how to make hydropower project sustainable. So International Hydropower Association has developed a protocol which can be used to test the sustainability of the hydropower projects. Then I'll talk on the key social issues and what are the mitigation process and what are environmental assessment and EIA process. So this will be the first part. The second part, I will talk about cost and benefits estimation and some introduction to financing community mini and micro hydro projects. Of course, large, medium hydropower projects are mostly developed by the public sector, by the government or private sector, with government public funding or private funding or funding from international development partners and other sources. But I will talk more about the community level mini and micro hydro projects funding. Okay. Now, as you must be aware, the environmental and social impacts of hydropower projects, especially of large hydropower projects, and especially with reservoirs. If you have a big, large reservoir, then the main issues are the social issues, because you need to displace population. You have to resettle population, people. And this is a very difficult part of any project development, a hydropower project, which has any resettlement issue, because you have to take the land and property, their houses, of people living in that area, and provide them compensation, and also provide them the means for resettling to a new location. So you have to also look at livelihood enhancement activities. You have to look at various social and economic activities to support the displacement of population, and especially indigenous people. When you have people who have been living in that area for ages, they are basically the local population. They have their own social network. They can come from a particular tribe, particular background, and indigenous people are very much attached to the land, because their livelihood normally depends on the land they live in. So dams and reservoirs can have issues, social issues, when you displace people from the location. Then the other part is, when you have upstream, when you have a reservoir or a dam or a diversion structure, in the downstream population, people may be, their livelihood may be disturbed, because they normally, local people depend on the river for their livelihood. It could be fishing, it could be for water supply or irrigation, religious purposes in some countries, in some societies. So there the livelihood of the people can be disturbed. And also it can have environmental problems of destruction of riparian habitat. People, the aquatic life, the fish, the other aquatic lives that depend on the river will face problems. So, for example, breeding areas of fish may be disturbed. Migration of fish will be restricted. Similarly, inundation of forests, because sometimes when you have a reservoir, you have to clear forests, and loss of biodiversity will occur. So this also involves some lost revenue of riparian communities from alternate economic activities such as fishing. Like maybe some communities depend on fisheries on the river, and when you disturb the flow in the river because of diversion or reservoir, then their livelihood is affected. So they will lose money. In addition, based on the studies by international organizations, lack of accountability, transparency, even corruption and poor governance, especially in large hydropower and infrastructure projects, also bring controversies. There is opposition from environmental groups, from activists, from other social organizations. However, I think many micro and small hydro projects do not face the above criticism if they are planned and developed in a participatory manner. I stress on the word participatory because you need the communities affected to really participate in the development of projects. And in my own country, Nepal, we have good experience of handing over micro hydro projects, mini hydro projects, even mini grids to community-based organizations where the community themselves are responsible for the operation and maintenance. And in fact, they also provide equity share on it. They own these specially isolated micro hydro projects. So this is a very important part of especially mini and micro hydro development. Okay, now the World Commission of Dams, the international organizations established under the UNEP framework, the World Commission of Dams, and they came up with a report called Dams and Development, a new framework for with a report on, how to make dams and development more environmental and friendly and socially acceptable. So they came up with 7 strategic priorities. I think it is important to recognize these strategic priorities. These include, first, you have to gain public acceptance. The people have to accept this project. Otherwise, the project will face into problems in construction and in operation. There has to be a comprehensive option assessment. And especially even mini hydros, you have to make sure the hydropower project you are designing, that is the best option. Is there any other option? And this could be other sources of energy, a solar system or a bioenergy if they are available. So you have to do a comparative study on these options. In some cases, other options may be limited. In some cases, there may be multiple options. So, and including the sizing, the size, of the components, no? What is the height of the dam? What is the design discharge? So these are also options you have to assess. Also, they talk about address existing dams. What they are saying is you need to make sure your other options, other dams are sustainable, are environmentally, socially acceptable. Now they talk about sustained rivers and livelihood. What they are saying is they want you to recognize the ecosystem value of these rivers, how people's livelihood depend on these rivers. So these rivers need to not disturb these ecosystem services and other livelihood services that the river is providing. It also asks to recognize entitlements and share benefits. I will come to this later. Normally, big hydropower projects, of course, they have very large benefits in terms of hydro energy generation, in terms of economic development of the region or the country. However, the local population may not get the same benefit, and they will be the affected people will have to bear the cost of these development. Ensure compliance, which means that there are social, environmental, fiduciary, governance, and other compliance that laws, legislations, and policies that the government and the development project partners have accepted. So we should make sure that we comply with these uh, obligations and policies. And finally, they talk about share rivers for peace, development, and security. What they mean to say is you have to take a river basin level approach. The same river will flow downstream. The same river is coming from upstream. So there is upstream, downstream linkages. And normally some rivers are flow through different countries. So development and other activities also have to be linked with the core riparian countries, core riparian communities, and the upstream and downstream communities. Uh, the industrialized countries, the Europe, USA, they have basically developed most of the rivers in their countries. And now, especially recently, I think even starting last few decades, they are adopting new laws to designate remaining rivers where they don't have dams or hydropower irrigation as free flowing rivers. So USA, Norway, I know, and other European countries, Canada, they have certain rivers where they say that they will not disturb and build the river flow. So whatever natural river flow is flowing, they want to maintain that. So industrialized countries are doing that. In the case of developing countries, in the cases of countries like Mozambique and other developing countries, where hydropower development is still in its infancy, we have to be careful on which rivers, which areas we should be building our hydropower projects. And there may be some rivers which are stretches of the rivers we don't want to disturb. So, but it is a national policy. It's a national decision that has to be taken. So this is an important factor for hydropower development as well. And the WCD report, what they are saying is, although large dams and hydro projects, if they have hydropower component, provide significant economic benefits in a regional and national context, these benefits were often provided at significant cost to local people. What it says is that the local communities suffer the brunt of these impacts, whereas the power is evacuated to another region, to the national grid. So this is an important factor we have to consider, especially when you are designing and planning for large hydropower projects. Okay, now regarding gaining public acceptance, the WCD report lists 4 basic priority principles. Okay, the first one is recognition of rights and assessment.
What one is this?
Sorry. Carlos, is there a question or something? Sorry, if there is a question, please let.
No, it was not a question. I think it was Gilles with his colleagues talking.
Okay, thank you. So now you have to recognize the rights and assessment of the risk. So what it is saying that is that you have to identify the stakeholders, who are the affected people, and then we have to involve them in the decision-making exercise on energy and water resources development. They have to have access to information, legal, and other support. Sometimes when you have big projects, big companies come and do the project. So the local people, the indigenous people, the tribal people, the women, the vulnerable groups, they may not have the capacity to really fully understand all the information available to them. So you have to find ways where information is provided to them so that they can make an informed decision. They can help you decide on the project. So this needs to be to also follow, like it has to demonstrate public acceptance of all key decisions in an open and transparent process. So what you are saying is the design of the project, when you are taking the layout, the other uh, uh, construction, everything has to be transparent, and the public and the stakeholders have to know, and they have to accept that such a construction is going on in this area. So especially decisions on projects affecting indigenous and tribal people should be guided by free, prior, and informed consent. This is like what it means to say is you have to ask them in advance. You should not force this decision on them, and the stakeholders should be informed of the project, so they should know the exact scope of the project and what will happen. So these are some guiding principles that needs to be followed. And now, talking of entitlement and sharing benefits, I would just like to give examples of two countries, Brazil and Nepal. What we mean to say is the local communities suffer the impact, yet the economic benefits to them are not guaranteed, especially for large projects. The project will be in a particular location, but most of the power energy generated will go to a faraway city or to the national grid. So sometimes the local communities may not feel that they are benefiting from this project. So clear set of rules of hydropower projects will share project benefits with local communities, will lead to win-win situation to all. What it means is, especially, I think it's followed in other countries, but I know for example, in Brazil, okay, any project over 10 megawatt, 6% of the power produced is considered is royalty uh, that has to be paid by the developer or the owner of the project. So out of this royalty, 10% goes to the federal government, 45% goes to the states that fall in that project area, and 45% goes to municipality district. So if you see that about 45% directly goes to the directly affected districts of this region. In the case of Nepal, 12% of our royalty is around 10% of the total energy, more than Brazil, and 12% of that royalties goes directly to the districts and villages in the case of Nepal. So this is, and now there is no right and wrong. This is a national policy. So it's a decision that the government has to take. Okay, so this is just an example of what other countries have followed. So similarly, as I said, the example of Nepal, we have the royalty mechanism I just explained. I actually also mentioned this in my previous sessions, lectures. So there is an equity investment. Local share offers to hydropower projects are 5 to 10% of the equity share is offered to the affected locals. 10 to 12% is offered to the general public. So that it is even in the investment, the local communities and general public are involved. Then employment and training and other livelihood support program are also carried out by these hydropower projects. Hydropower projects also invest on community development and local infrastructure, including healthcare. A small village hospital is established, small schools are established, a support to the schools. rural electrification, roads, and other benefits are also provided. And some projects also go beyond the direct mitigation measures, but they also go for what is known as the environmental services. Because, by environmental services, what we mean is, if the catchment area is well protected, if in the catchment area, if the forest cover, the land use is well maintained, it will have positive impact on the water availability and the sediment transport. So this will benefit the hydropower project. So hydropower projects, in fact, compensate, pay for the services that the whole river basin catchment provides. And communities are compensated for carrying out watershed management, conservation activities in the upstream areas. So this is one of the ways to share benefits of hydropower. In smaller projects, community mobilization is very important, particularly for off-grid small hydropower projects. They typically have small environmental problems, but because the riparian themselves, the people using the rivers, are themselves the primary beneficiaries of this hydropower project. So there is more acceptability. But one key factor that you have to understand is communities need to be mobilized. They should be fully aware of the hydropower project. And I take one example of a mini hydropower project community mobilization procedure, the steps. Okay, and this is basically based on experience in other countries, including Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, even Kenya, I think. And the typical steps of the community mobilization for mini hydro is, first, you have to support the community to list their needs and priorities and to select and act on behalf of the community to execute development projects. To select community organization, sorry, there was a small mistake. So community has to now know what is their needs and priorities in that area. Okay, is energy the priority? If energy is identified as a priority for investment, then you have to carry out a needs assessment and an analysis of all energy options available to the community. What it means to say is, like I said, there is 100 households living in a village, and every household has, let's say, 200 kilowatt of 200 watt of 200 watt of demand. Then 100 households multiplied by 200, you have around 100 household and 200. So you have about 200 kilowatt of energy power demand. Okay, so then you have to now look at the options available to meet this demand. Similarly, when you do the community mobilization, you should do a survey and feasibility study after confirming that the decision to proceed with the hydropower project has come with a full discussion of all options. So what are the other options to meet this demand? If hydropower is a preferred option, then you have to do a survey and feasibility study. Then you discuss the detailed terms of partnership with the community representative, and then come up with the tasks and responsibilities between community and the supporting program. See, this is, so now you have to divide the tasks between the communities and the project developers, for example. Similarly, you need to hold a general meeting with all beneficiaries at the conclusion to agree on the terms and partnerships to be signed between the program and the community. So if you develop a mini or a micro hydro project at the community level, you have to ensure the community mobilization, the community are developed. This is the experience of some programs in Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other countries. Similarly, uh, in, in hydropower, mini hydropower development, gender is an important issue. Okay, gender aspects of community hydropower development is a very important issue because hydropower benefits both men and women, but sometimes in different ways. For example, depending on the end use that this energy hydropower project will supply power to, men and women will benefit differently. For example, if the benefit is from electricity or mechanical power to use to for agro processing, rice milling, grinding grain, or pressing oil, then women in traditional societies are the ones who are doing this drudgery intensive manual tasks of agro processing. So women will have a lot of free time, uh, will benefit based on these this project. So it is important that we make them understand what is the end use of this power generation. And in some cases, hydropower replaces firewood. So time collecting on firewoods, often the task of women and girls. Then women, from a gender perspective, it will be more if firewood is replaced, if agro-processing activities is supported by this hydropower, because then instead of having a manual, mechanical, manual process, then you have the electricity or mechanical power from hydropower from a water mill, which can provide these services. So gender is an important aspect also. In the case of Nepal, there was one study which showed that the micro hydro projects in Nepal, they increased the girls' education because girls had more time to study or they had free time. Their livelihood, the family's livelihood had improved. So this led to girls being, their education, they were more serious in their studies. They had more time for their studies. There was also a more balanced division of work between men and women. So work discrimination on the basis of gender was reduced because you had access to energy. This was the benefit of access to energy. Increase in women's involvement in community and social activities was also seen. Women were more empowered, so they took up leadership role because providing access to energy in rural villages really helped women's empowerment as well. So there was more balanced access and control over community resources between men and women. So gender equality, gender equity was promoted. So the study attributed these as achievement to investment into community mobilization. So when communities were mobilized to develop, plan, operate these hydropower projects, uh, we had these benefits to the community. Okay, now I would just like to tell you, okay, these were the impacts, what are the community linkages, and we talked about the controversies that hydropower projects face. So International Hydropower Association has come up with, let me just, come up with a protocol which has a sustainability guideline based on various factors. For example, this protocol, this guideline does scoring of hydropower projects in terms of all these factors. And the important factors regarding social and environmental issues are also part of this protocol. For example, resettlement, indigenous people. Does the project support indigenous people? Are they taken good care of? Similarly, climate change, project affected communities and livelihood. What are the impacts on project affected communities? Is the downstream flow rights maintained by the hydropower project? We need to make sure downstream water rights are not disturbed. Waste, noise, and water quality during construction operation, are these within the reasonable standards of the country? Is there any disturbance to the water quality? Is there any changes to the water quality? If there is a reservoir, what are the reservoir management policies adopted? So erosion and sediment, because when you have infrastructure, roads, hydropower, it can also lead to instability of slopes and other things. Similarly, biodiversity and invasive species, are they managed? Are they disturbed? So this is very important also. So you have public health is an important factor, because sometimes when you have construction activities and other activities, public health can be disturbed. Cultural heritage, does the project impact any cultural heritage of the people? Similarly, you have labor and other working conditions. You have to follow, certain labor laws and rules. So these are, basic factors that any hydropower project has to make sure that they are not disturbed and are compliant. So what are the processes? That these are the impact areas, but what are the processes that affect these areas? For example, what are the procurement processes? What is the communication and activities? How are governance being done? Similarly, other environmental and social issues management. Are the EIA and the resettlement plan properly done and implemented? And the hydrological resources, asset management reliability, financial viability has to be looked at it. Project benefits has to be managed. So these are the hydropower sustainability protocol has all these factors, and you evaluate, you monitor the hydropower project based on all these indicators. So this is a very important resource for any hydropower developer to follow. Of course, it is more critical in the large hydropower projects, but even small, medium, and micro and mini project should follow these protocol. Okay, talking of the environmental issues, the key issues that the IHA sustainability protocol has looked at is the aquatic terrestrial biodiversity, threatened species. They look at these, what are the impact on aquatic and terrestrial biodiversities, impact on threatened species, on critical habitats, are ecosystem integrity, connectivity issues any disturbed? What is the impact on water quality, erosion, and sedimentation? So environmental impact project can extend beyond the boundaries of the project where it is located, because it can have impacts, like I said, on a downstream area. So it can cover more than the project area. So the environmental issues regarding these activities is very important to be monitored. In terms of social issues, what are the project affected communities? Who are the project affected communities? How are they impacted? Are there any indigenous people living in the project area? Are there any ethnic minorities? So you have to make Sorry. So what are the resettlement issues? As I mentioned, you have to have a proper resettlement action plan. You have to make sure people who have to be moved, involuntary resettlement, are, fully informed and they're taken well care of. The cultural heritage, both physical and non-physical, you have to look at these issues. Public health is an issue that you have to look at it from a social perspective. The above are analyzed with respect to socioeconomic indicators, including living standards, livelihood, health statistics, as well as gender. Again, these impacts also extend beyond the jurisdictional boundaries of the project, and you have to access beyond that. And the other important part is you have to look at the cumulative impact that results from the project. And these cumulative impacts are incremental impact of the project when added to the other past, present, or reasonably foreseeable future. What we mean to say is there might already be an impact. And because of this project, the level of impact increases, and it can be, and this level of impact can exceed the threshold of acceptability. Okay, so it can create problems when you have multiple impacts on top of each other. So the effects should be assessed in terms of the capacity of the water resources, ecosystem, and or affected communities to accommodate such impacts. And then you have to do it, the analysis, within realistic boundaries. So these are some of the key factors. Now, okay, impacts will occur. Does that mean we should not be doing the hydropower projects? Well, there are ways where you can mitigate these adverse impacts. You can, all the positive impacts, you should try to enhance, to increase, whereas the negative impacts has to be mitigated by using three issues. One is you should, as far as possible, you have to avoid and prevent negative or adverse impact. If there is a cultural site where your project passes by, and if there is an alternate alignment, for example, your canal or your headrest pipe, if you have an option of taking an alternative alignment, then you should avoid having a negative impact on the cultural heritage site. Similarly, if this cannot be avoided or prevented, then you have to try to minimize the adverse impact. So when you say minimize the adverse impact, then you try to, like for example, if the reservoir level will inundate an important historical site or an important village, if you cannot avoid that, then is there a way where you can lower the reservoir level not to impact that project? So this is to minimize the impact. Then if you cannot avoid, you cannot minimize, then mitigation and compensation has to be done. Mitigation means you find ways how you reduce the impact is one. And if that reduction mitigation measure is not enough, you have to give them compensation. Compensation in kind, in cash, and in other means. For example, resettlement is some sort of a compensation, but it will not just be enough to give them cash. You have to give them other livelihood enhancing support also. So these are the basic processes that are required to mitigate these environmental impacts. Okay, these were very general social and environmental impacts. And now most hydropower projects, they have to basically prepare an environmental assessment of the project. So we have a certain process of, and these are according to national policies. Even as far as I know, Mozambique, for example, has a national policy or a legislation on environmental impact assessment. So we have to follow that policy when we prepare the environmental assessment. I think I have been speaking a lot. I'm sorry. Today the session is more one way. But if there is any question, let me just stop for a few minutes. And I think it is around 50 minutes also. So maybe we can take questions for 5 minutes, then maybe break for 10 or 15 minutes also. Carlos, please, can you please ask any questions? Sorry, I've been speaking, and please raise your hand or ask question in between also if I'm going fast or something I say is not clear. Yes, please, Carlos, can I help ask you?
Thank you, Divas. I think they have been following. Momento para perguntas e comentários. Façam favor.
Bom dia a todos. Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. Indeed, sometimes I think that these social issues and environmental issues are very important for the success of a project. Although there is sometimes a non-synchronization of these activities with the technical activities. It is very desirable that the specialists in the socio-economic domain, human domain, environmental domain, biophysical aspects, really start working with the engineers from the beginning. In many cases, we see that the engineers come with the solution and then ask for an environmental specialist to look at it. And sometimes it's too late because the solutions have to be changed. So it is very important that the concept of the design is already taking into account all these environmental aspects and human aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you really summarized what I was trying to present. I think I fully agree. And in Mozambique, for example, has there been any controversy when you are developing a hydropower project or an infrastructure project? Are the people or social organization, NGOs supporting them, or there are some problems in the development? Maybe some of you or Mr. Vaz, you could, what is the situation in Mozambique?
Yeah, the situation in Mozambique is still growing into the institutions. And many times, for example, if we see dams are not a regular, easy job. It's done once every 5 years, a big dam comes on. So it's not really an ongoing job in Mozambique, although we still have projects in the pipeline. But if you, for example, think about the electricity line, for example, or a road project, these are more regular jobs. And the companies sometimes don't give enough resources for this component of the social aspects and environmental aspects. They don't put resources because they don't think it's important. Or sometimes they say it's important, but they don't give the resources. So the job is not done properly. And there is many problems that projects are not, that don't follow the guidelines. And talking about the guidelines, in most cases, these projects are funded by external organizations like the World Bank, African Development Bank, and they come with their own principles. So we have to comply with both guidelines. And sometimes these guidelines are similar, sometimes they're not so similar. So it's another important aspect in Mozambique that we see.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is true in many other countries. Even in my own country, when you have World Bank and we have the Asian Development Bank, sometimes there are some of the policies are different. But luckily in my country, Nepal, now with our experience over the last 2 or 3 decades, our environmental, social safeguard policies are quite developed. So, but still, as you mentioned, sometimes we engineering community do not take this seriously, and it will create problem. And my own experience shows that when the project has taken environmental, social issues seriously, the implementation of the project is much easier. I mean, the project are finished in time because there is no disturbance by the local communities. Because when you make a road or a transmission line, I'm sure it will happen. It must be true in Mozambique also, in my country and other countries. Sometimes local population oppose those projects. So it takes time to convince them. But when you do a full environmental social impact assessment and community mobilization in the beginning, this process is easier. I think it is very important.